Welcome to Wildspire. You get to be a fly on the wall for my intimate conversations with entrepreneurs who are changing the world. I'm your host, Stephanie Benedetto, coach, storyteller, and unmarketer at The Awakened Business, helping coaches and change-making entrepreneurs unleash their inspired message and share it with playful unmarketing. I'll ask curious questions and explore uncharted waters with my guest today. Anything can happen when we step into the unknown of infinite creativity, and that's where we're going to play. My guest today is Tigrilla Gardenia, nature-inspired mentor and leadership coach. We had a fascinating, magical conversation about nature-inspired business, the music of plants, and what they have to say, how to connect with your wild spirit plant, and conscious evolution, in particular in business. A little bit more about Tigrilla. Tigrilla Gardenia was fascinated by nature and music from her earliest memories. She earned a degree in music and electrical engineering, and then entered the high-tech corporate world of real networks and Microsoft in the early days of the internet. Tigrilla forged her own path to evolve past prescribed confines, which took her on many adventures, including co-owning a circus, producing intentional dance events, teaching Kabbalah, and even touring with Cirque du Soleil. Today, she's a nature-inspired mentor and leadership coach whose studies focus on reconnection and collaboration with plants, the effects of plant music on human health, and ecosystems thinking. Tigrilla has the honor of being a citizen of Damanhur in Italy, one of the largest spiritual eco-communities in the world. Tigrilla uses her expertise to empower leaders to achieve personal and professional success by integrating nature-inspired innovation. Get ready for an adventurous conversation with Tigrilla. Welcome, Tigrilla. It is my great pleasure to have you here on the Wildspire podcast. And I'm so excited because I came across you, I think on Facebook somewhere, and I was just struck by, for one, I'm in love with entrepreneurs who have passionate, bold messages. And yours certainly is that. Also really, it's different. Your perspective is different, and I so value that in what you're bringing to the conversation, and it's also aligned with some of the things that I've been seeing. So I wanted to start out with what might sound like a funny question, but I don't think it's funny at all to be asking you this. What does the music of plants sound like? And you can give me a little more background in that, because someone who's listening, what the hell is she talking about?
Exactly. So the music of the plants is exactly what it is, which is it is literally music composed live by plants. So I live in a place called Damanhur. Damanhur is one of the largest spiritual eco-communities in the world. It's in northern Italy, and we were founded in the mid-1970s. So since about 1976, people have been living together in this little place in the middle of nowhere of Italy, about 45 minutes away from Turin. And obviously, being a community that's based on esoteric and spiritual philosophies, one of the big topics is how do we connect in with other species, whether we're talking about some spirals or selves, or whether we're talking about, plants and animals. And so the community, which is started to tinker with the idea of, well, what if we could hear plants in some ways, right? We have biofeedback machines that exist out there. And so the community started to work on this way back in the 1970s, like late 1970s. So yes, The Secret Life of Plants, for those who know that book, existed, but people here didn't really know it. So that wasn't even the point of it. The point was just like, can we listen into the plant mind? Back then, you didn't even know that the plants had minds, but that's a whole other topic that we'll probably get into at some point. And so we started playing around with this device and started to listen to the frequencies, the electrical signals that they have, like using a biofeedback device, and eventually created this device that allows plants to create music. And this device is really interesting because it was born of a desire to connect to the plants. Now, we thought at the very beginning, as Damanhurians thought, that this would just be a one-way conversation. In other words, a way for us to hear what plants were doing. we thought, plants are creating signals. These signals, we can turn them into notes of music. We can listen to that music, and that was it. And that's pretty cool, right? That's like listening into what's happening. But of course, if you know musicians, or if you are a musician, as soon as you hear music, you want to play along. Like you thump along, you might grab your guitar, you might sing. And that's, of course, what people started to do. And what would happen was that the plants would change. The music would start to change. And they were like, well, what does that mean? And the longer a plant played, the more the music would adapt. And now there was a conversation that was starting. Like the plant would adapt to what the human was playing. The human would then adapt back. And just like you would expect any two musicians who are jamming together, a conversation through music endured. And that is kind of like what spawned this whole idea of, well, wait a minute, maybe this isn't just randomness. Again, the studies around the intelligence of plants, plant mind, conversations that kind of are starting to exist today and over the last maybe about 10 to 12 years have started to take hold, didn't exist at that time. So nobody really had a vocabulary for this. So the music of the plants is just that. Giving plants the ability through a small device to compose music, and then the ability for you to play along with that music changes. So it's an interaction, it's a conversation, it's a way to experience plants in a way that we didn't expect, because we can see plants, we can smell plants, we can touch plants, you have all the other senses, but nobody had thought about really listening to plants.
So does it sound like, if you're going to describe the music, it sounds like since it's changing and it was co-creative, is it different all the time? Does it have, like, how would you describe it if you're...
It's very different. And that's, I think, the most interesting aspect about it. If you are a sort of like, I find it that if you're somebody who's connected to the plant world, or who wants to connect to the plant world, it's otherworldly, because it doesn't have the rhythms that we're used to. Now, I've had the music analyzed. I mean, I've been working now with the music of the plants since 2013. It's been the primary way that I have connected. I'm a musician by trade. I'm a music engineering. That's what I studied in college. And so, so my degrees in music engineering and electrical engineering. So the idea of bringing music and technology together is like, yes, that's me. That's totally my background. And so over the years, I've had the music analyzed. I've worked in double-blind studies of all sorts. And the music has a very ancient feel to it, like really connected into modalities of music that, unless you're a hardcore jazzer, you don't really play. But more than anything, the sounds depends, because the device allows you to select your sounds. But if you listen to the rhythms, and if you listen to the actual notes, it is very different from modern music. It has, there's no really way to describe it, and every plant is very unique. So some plants might play more like scales. Some plants instead will jump around. Some like to stay very high in the register. Some stay, it's really kind of in that way like humans.
How delightful. I just love that. It's such a magical conversation to even have. And I think for me, it's good to talk about this, because it reminds me that there's so much that I don't know, and there's so much more happening that I could be aware of. So thank you for indulging that question.
Yeah, well, and again, the music of the plants, the thing about it is that we live in most human beings, and I even include myself in this, live in a perpetual plant blindness. And plant blindness has been defined, it's a term that was defined as really not seeing the true effects and the true value of plants within the human world. We all sort of live, even those of us, and I love plants, like I live and breathe plants and their intelligence, and I communicate with them, and I teach people about, I work with plants all the time. And yet, I might put my shirt on and not realize that a plant gave their life for the shirt that I'm wearing. Or I might eat a plate of food and wolf it down and not be thinking about the fact that a plant, again, gave their life. Or the table that I'm sitting at, which is made out of wood. Like, we live very much in a plant blindness. And so when you listen to something like this music, again, because it comes through a different sense, all of a sudden you're aware of plants. Like, not only do you look around your room and like identify the plants that you see around you, But now all of a sudden you start to ask yourself other questions like, wait, what else am I missing out?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's under my feet? What am I wearing? Like there's lots of questions that start to open up. And so therefore it's a gateway. I call it it was my gateway drug.
Wow, cool. So you said something when we were talking just before we started, Tigrilla, that really resonated with me. So one of the things that I've been looking at in business is, and I know that you do a lot with nature inspired business, nature inspired living, plant wisdom as seen in these arenas. And the sense that I've been having is that we've made up business to be different than life, to be not nature, but we are nature. Like that's what we are. And what we make is therefore of nature. And there's no, like it is no different actually the way that it works, but we've made it up as different. So I'm beginning to see that the statement that you made was about, we were talking about, what you do and how your business evolves. And you said, who I am is what I do and what I do is who I am. And so your business evolves out of that. And this is the sense that I've been having in business is that when we are our authentic selves, this is our marketing. This is our business. This is like just being is the wellspring from which all of this comes. And I think of something like a flower or a plant. There's no efforting in what it does, but there's so much aliveness and so much that's happening, but it doesn't come from this pushing and forcing that we typically do inside of business. And I have this sense of the ecosystem, and I'm going to give you a chance to like riff off of this in whatever ways you want, but that, oh, wow, we're connected and we have everything that we need just as in the ecosystem. Like we're really no different. We just think that we are. We just think that it's all on us. Like a flower doing what it does attracts everything it needs to survive, to thrive, to blossom, to grow. And we are the same. When we let go of all the stuff that's not that, when we drop all the thinking and we can relax into it and know that we're taken care of and guided. So like, tell me about what that brings up for you, because that was a bunch of words.
It was, but I mean, the concept is exactly that. The concept is when we look at it, so we are nature, as you said. I observe nature also, and I participate in nature. And the thing we forget is that, of course, just like you could have two oak trees, two exact same species. They could have even come from the same seed. But if I grow one in one part of the forest and I grow the other in another part of the forest changes those plants, but the plants change the forest, right? And so we ourselves are also exactly the same way, right? This is the reason why twins are not exactly, even though they start from the same place. So there's a nourishment that happens there. There's a relationship that happens there. And there is a change of roles that's constantly happening. Again, me as observer, me as participant, and me as being. And in an ecosystem, I recognize those roles of myself and I'm able to then participate in them fully, knowing that everything I create needs to have a purpose, needs to have a place in which it belongs, right? So if I'm a flower, like you said, if I produce a color, it's usually to attract a pollinator. If I produce a sap, it's to nourish something else. When my leaf falls, it's going to come back and get composted into the soil, and the soil is going to nourish me. If I take in extra sugars and I have excess, which is, I give that excess away to someone else who needs it. There's a relationship that says, in myself as this plant, I know what I need, not just to grow and to thrive, like you mentioned, which is true, but also to evolve. I know how to welcome in changes and spontaneous and understand the difference between, ooh, this over here is happening and it's outside of the ordinary and it's a pathogen versus this over here is happening and it's outside of the norm. But what if I can use that and evolve with that? So how do I become more resistant? How do I become more resilient? All these types of things. When I then step into that same role, when I step into what I call your true nature, right? I step into that feeling and I think of myself in that place, all of a sudden, I have to do something with meaning. I have to create something that gets used by somebody else. I have to create something like the idea of a circular nature, of sustainability, of regenerative no longer becomes a task. It becomes something that I am. I naturally create that. This is the reason I keep talking about naturally conscious leaders. The idea that when I am fully conscious of who I am, and I then step in and I fully embody that, and I remember that I am nature, then all of a sudden it becomes natural for me to do the right thing. Not because I'm afraid that somebody's going to punish me, or not because I'm trying to please somebody else. I just do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Like it just becomes, and I'm more satiated. I'm more, I enjoy it more. I don't need as much. People often ask me, it's very common in business to talk about like, how many figures do I want to make? I want to make 6 figures. I want to make, I don't care about any of that. I want to create the things I want to create that sustain the lifestyle that I want to sustain myself in. And that lifestyle is conditioned by the fact that I am nature. And so therefore, I don't know, I don't need 17 different things that maybe I really buy because I'm afraid or whatever. That doesn't mean I don't have like moments when I go off and I'm luxurious with myself. It's not about that, but it's about that event satiates me. It pleases me. It experiences. And more than anything, it's done in a way, I want to do it in a way that nourishes others. So my whole business paradigm sort of changes because it's an expression of that true nature of who I am and that connection to the planet, which means I would never hurt the planet. So I wouldn't do things. I won't do things if I'm conscious about that would create that kind of damage. Mm-hmm. I naturally look for solutions or for things, and they're fun. I don't think of them as a chore.
And that in itself is, what I'm so excited to help people to see as possible in any area of their life, but in particular in their business or marketing, where it seems like it's not fun. Those areas where it looks like it sucks, it's a task, it's something I have to do. So one of the things that I've been seeing that kept coming up as you were talking, and I can really feel, by the way, Tigrilla, or like, it seems as if I can feel the way that you, like, I'm getting something different hearing you talk about it. I'm like, oh, just hearing you talk about it has a sense of something that I'm taking about this ecosystem, about us as nature, about caring for naturally being conscious, naturally caring for the things, the people, the environment, the plants, the earth around us. And that's what I've been seeing, is that so much of what is not that, where people are coming from fear, from scarcity, there's not enough to go around, is because of a feeling internally that they're not safe or they're not allowed to be what they are. And it's the more, like, it's really only in the last couple of years that I've woken up in a more socially conscious way, because I finally started truly beginning to feel safe, truly beginning to know that I'm okay being me, that the eternal, the most real part of me, which is not my personality, which is not my body, is always okay. And the more I see that, the more I naturally start seeing things around me and people around me and beings around me that I want to help, that I want to be kind towards. It's a very natural outflowing, that it's not me making myself because I have a judgment that that's the way I should be. So I felt that a lot in what you're saying, like when you know you are cared for and sustained, and it's a natural thing. It's not something we have to make ourselves do. And when you said the word evolve, it was like bing to me, like evolve. So tell me about, what do you see evolving? Like, what are you helping people to evolve in themselves, in their businesses, or how that appears to you?
Well, nature really has one major goal: to evolve. That's what it is. It's depending on what philosophy you follow, your spirituality, we are in this giant kind of game of life. And the game of life continuously evolves their level of complexity so that we can absorb more, live more, be more of ourselves with it being easier. Because the more complex, not complicated, complex something is, then the more I am able to do or be without having to feel that weight of it. So that is what nature is always doing. Nature is always looking to evolve. It's acquiring new information. Like I said, a plant might be growing right now in an area that it's always grown in. Now, all of a sudden, there's a little bit more drought. There's a little bit less pollinators. So now the strategies have to change, and I've got to evolve. I've got to change with those conditions. I have to be adaptable. Fritjof Capra says that, health is my ability to adapt, whichever kind of health you're talking about. My physical body, my cells need to be able to adapt, or my mentality needs to be able to adapt. All of it is adapting and growing into it. So co-creating in that aspect. And this is what nature really does. So this is what we're trying to do. So it's really important for us to, yes, transformation is great, but transformation sometimes is about just changing things from one place to another and hoping that you're going to get the same type of result, like you're maybe improving a little bit the result. Evolution instead is about acquiring something new that comes into the system. That could be new knowledge. That could be a characteristic that changes. This could be a new outlook. It could be a paradigm shift. It could be any kind of nourishment, and using that to become more complex, to become the next level of whatever I'm supposed to be. So this is part of what, the biggest aspect of what I work with people. It is like, it's not just about just transforming. It's about literally learning how to consciously evolve in more and more into who it is that you were meant to be, who it is that you are in nature themselves. You were talking earlier about fear. I fundamentally believe that most human beings live with a low level fear that comes really from the fact that we are separated from nature so much that we no longer feel, like you said, safe, because we don't know how to get food and we don't know how to get shelter. Just even those two basic things drive so much. Why do you have money? You have money because you need to go to the supermarket, because most people don't know how to grow their own food anymore. Or they don't know, even if they know how to grow maybe in a garden, what happens if they don't have those seeds for the garden? They don't know how to deal with, anything, other kinds of situations that are happening. So a lot of my work is around working on those low-level fears, these low-level fears that drive you to continuously separate yourself from nature, to continuously think, I can't be who I truly am, because who I truly am will not allow me to survive, to feel safe, to feel nourished, and all these types of aspects. So it's really important for us to kind of, again, learn how to take in what's around us, whatever that might be, right? Right now, I live in Northern Italy. Obviously, you can tell by my accent that I'm not Italian. I'm Cuban American. I grew up in the United States. I grew up in a place that, had a different culture. I've lived in many different countries. And what always helps me is that ability to be flexible and to adapt, that security I have in myself, that comfort that I have in who I am, that allows me to embrace whatever newness comes to me, whether that be in a form of a criticism or whether that be in the form of some new gift somebody gives me, and then use that to evolve to a next level of myself. I always say that when I'm learning a new language, it's kind of like this spiral that you're taking. And it's a metaphor I also use in life. You learn a language, first you learn the basics. Then there comes a time when you can kind of communicate with somebody, and then all of a sudden you're not communicating anymore. You're like, wait a minute, I used to be able to communicate. Why did now does it feel like it's forgotten? And it's because you're reaching a new level of complexity. You're no longer okay with just putting words together. You want to form sentences. So then you start forming sentences, and you can have these kind of basic conversations with people where are full sentences, but the level is kind of a little bit superficial. But you keep listening to what people are saying, and you mimic back their words to them. And then all of a sudden now, again, it's broken. And you're like, wait, how is it that I was having really great conversations? Yeah, they were slow. Yeah, they were kind of on a superficial level. And it's because you're acquiring more language skills. So now you're learning how to put in these more complex terms, these terms that have more color, more depth, and that now you have a richness. And every time you add a richness to the level, at first it kind of feels broken. But if you stop and you don't judge yourself for it and you say, wait a minute, maybe it's because something new is coming in. Yeah, you got to break it a little bit because I'm no longer okay with being at that level. I want to go farther. I want to move. I want to become more complex. And all of a sudden the language keeps acquiring their richness. And that's exactly the same way it is for all of these types of things. It's with fears. It's with my way I run my business. At first, it's a little bit of work. I'm doing it in a kind of basic rudimentary way. Then all of a sudden that rudimentary way doesn't work anymore. I'm spinning up to the next level. Oh, wait a minute. I'm acquiring. I've learned from my audience. I've learned from my clients. I've learned from my competitors. My competitors are turning into my partners. My partners are moving into new levels so that I'm bringing in new people. Like there's so many different aspects of it. But if we look at it as what we call ecosystem succession, the way ecosystems are built, we start to understand that this is a natural process. A pioneering species in an ecosystem really only has a series of roles that they carry out. They tend to be fast growers. They tend to nourish the land around them. They don't always live for the longest period of time. So we don't expect the pioneer species in which from a human perspective, it's not saying that you're not going to live a long time, but that may be that characteristic of your pioneering characteristic or the pioneering spirit of your company might only last for a while but it has to nourish what's happening below. So a pine tree, which is a typical pioneer species, will start to grow in an ecosystem where there's nothing. So you have deserted land. All of a sudden, a pine cone starts to take root. It starts to break down what's happening in the ground through the roots. It starts to come up very fast. It could deal with heavy sun because there's no other trees to shade. So it is adapted to harsh conditions like many startups. It then drops needles that nourish the ground below. It starts to provide shade because it's an evergreen for what's growing on the floor. And every single season, all of a sudden, the trees and the plants and the bushes that are starting to grow below, that brings in few more animals. That brings in a few more diversity of species. These start to grow. Eventually, you get birches or other types of trees that might even grow bigger than that original pine tree. And the pine tree might die off, but that's okay because that role is done. That first level succession is done. And now the forest has moved into another level of succession. And this is the kind of way ecosystems grow. And so we can use these understandings, not even just as metaphors, but as actual models and muses, because that is how we are. We are nature. So we should be doing these things. And then it makes you feel, like you said, you give yourself permission to say, oh, it's okay if that part of my business dies off, because that was the pioneering part. That role, that behavior was part of the pioneering part, and we're not there anymore. So we don't have to. And I'll break it off for a while. And when I reach a really new level of stability, I might pop it up in a corner, like saying, I'm going to incubate it, right? What we call an ecotone, a place that starts to combine one ecosystem and another. So there's a lot of different, the more we can connect back to our roots, to who we really are as nature, the easier things become, because now I don't see anything I do as wrong. I understand that it's like, oh, these are normal cycles and I can use them. This is a cycle that's happening. So rather than resist, I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to step deeper into it. I'm going to let that die off. I'm going to nourish this over here. Oh, wait a minute. Over here, I'm not nourishing anything. So there's something wrong here. I got to modify that. I'm going to evolve. Ooh, a disaster happened over here. Great. This gives me new information I can then use and work with and evolve into. So there's all these aspects that we step back into when we step back into our true nature.
That is super cool. And I think one of the most powerful things that I'm taking from that is, again, this is how it's supposed to work, like reminders of that learning curve or that spiral evolution of learning something. So many times I have clients who come to me and they're frustrated because it's like, I must not really get this because I thought I got this. I must not have gotten it. I'm like, sometimes like, yes, you got it, you saw it, and sometimes we forget. And sometimes there's this thing that's happening where, like, I notice in myself, I become sensitized to something. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I thought I dealt with those insecurities. And it feels like they came back and it's worse. But actually, it's a more subtle level. It's like
Mm-hmm.
now I've lost my taste for it. And
Right.
it's another part of learning, and the ability to be able to let things go when the time is done, and knowing that's a part of how the ecosystem works is really powerful.
Right.
Um, what I want to ask you, like, can you help me to see this? Like, how can we really learn from this in our businesses? Like, can you give me a specific example of something that often happens to someone, and how they can, viewing this through the lens of the ecosystem, they can see it in a different way?
Sure. I mean, let's go back to this kind of pioneering species that we were talking about. Okay. So let's assume I have my business now for a while, right? And I want to build in a new piece to it, right? I want to maybe expand into a new model, a new sector, or maybe, I have my primary niche that I'm working really well with. And all of a sudden now I want to explore into another niche. I have to remember that the way that my business is working today, that might be staple, is not what you do when you're creating an incubator type project or when you're starting off something new. So we want to assume that we're going into a new barren land. So let's not take the example of a pine tree, but we'll take the example of a nurse bush, right? So a nurse bush is a type of bush that often grows. There's a few different species that are considered nurse bushes, but these bushes start to grow up, and they grow kind of from things that are similar in the ecosystem. So you have an ecosystem that maybe is really stable. You've had a disturbance that's happened. Now all of a sudden everything is barren. Maybe a fire came through and something like that. So now all of a sudden I'm going to start something new out. And I got to remember that my characteristics are different, right? Things that would work in my stable business. It's not like I pick up and I say, okay, like, I'll use an example. Like I have my clients in a certain way. I speak to them in this way, and I send newsletters out on the regular basis and this and that, because this is the way that it works. So I send my newsletters. I maybe do my campaigns. I get my clients in this way, or that's how it is. Or maybe I have a networking circle. Well, when you're doing an incubator project, that doesn't exist, right? Not because now you're going into a new market. So you have to look at the landscape again and say, okay, well, what is the landscape? And how do I put in this first seed that's going to start to grow in that landscape? So where I might have seeded my original landscape was maybe grass. And so therefore I seeded it with some particular kind of focus. But over here, I've got rock. So I've got to focus in on another thing. So it's important to be connected to place. So this means that if my original business maybe was a business that was built off of referrals, I went around and I contacted all of my friends, but now I want to break into lead generation, and I want to get leads in a completely different, I want to break into a market where people don't know me, where I don't have any contacts. I got to start new. You don't want to use the models that you're using. You want to use your experience, right? In the sense that my adaptability and all those characteristics, but I need to start with completely new things. And that means planting a first seed, letting it grow a little bit, and seeing what of that seed works, letting some of those needles fall to the ground. So maybe you try, I don't know, an ad, and the ad works. Or maybe it works a little bit and it brings in some people, but maybe that's not really your client. But you know the experience over here that you've had referrals. So now all of a sudden I have these clients, and I know that, okay, these people, they first talk to me are cool, but they're not exactly the people who are going to buy from me. Great. Well, I have the experience of knowing how to do referrals. What if I was to talk to these people now that I've at least got them listening a little bit, and I know they're not going to buy from me because that's not this new product. I haven't figured out who my client is, but maybe I can ask them for referrals. Maybe I can use my experience from the referral work world that I built over here and work there. But the way I acquired them is different because it's a new landscape. And then afterwards, I take some of the skills that I have and I seed back in some of those other species now that I've built in a different engine. Does that make sense?
So what I'm seeing that you're doing is kind of using nature and plants in particular as an intuitive mirror for us to see what's happening in our own lives and our own businesses, because we
Mm-hmm.
are just as much of an ecosystem and we can learn from them in that way. So if I'm feeling barren in a certain way, like, well, what would a plant do if they were in a barren landscape, or what kinds of plants would thrive, while those that, and I could learn from that and take inspiration from it. And also I love the way that you're speaking to, we're taking our past experience with us. I think that's something that what I see from entrepreneurs in transition is that sometimes they get confused and think they're like, I don't want any of that anymore, because
Right.
they're not into doing it that way anymore. But
Right.
there's a way in which you can take all that you've learned and those skills and resources and the experience and map it over in a totally new way. The experience for you is completely different, but it's not, it's including all of that, like all of the pieces. That's
Yeah,
super
we
cool.
call these the deep patterns, right? And I work with a lot of multi-potentialites. I work with a lot of people who
Gee, I wonder
transition.
why.
Yeah, exactly. And so lots and lots of passions. And you think, oh my God, people think I just jump around from one to one. When we start talking, we start working and we look at it from a nature perspective, we say, okay, wait, what's the deep pattern? Because the truth of the matter is we all have an express deep patterns. Like one of my deep patterns is I love to organize. I'm just really good at seeing patterns in general. I'm really good at seeing how things fit and lock in together. Doesn't matter what I'm doing, whether or not when I was engineering and creating like music through, and doing concerts, whether I was working at Microsoft when I was a release manager and when I worked on different product design, whether I was doing biomimicry projects, when I was first coming to my community and starting to experience things in my community, my skill set is that pattern recognition. And it didn't matter what the passion that I was exploring it through, whether it was technology or analog things, or it didn't matter. That's one of my deep patterns. Now that deep pattern is what I use to fulfill my life purpose. And that might come over the years in different aspects. So like you said, when we transition from one place to another, what we really want to look for is the deep pattern. And a deep pattern from a biological perspective is usually made up of a simple rule. It's something super simple. It's an archetype that identifies who we are. And like you said earlier, when we start to look at natural patterns and we look at them as models and muses, and in my work also as co-creators, we start to understand and give ourselves permission to learn, because again, we give ourselves permission to make mistakes, because nature does create mistakes. Nature does have accidents that happen. And many times those accidents are the things we prize the most, right? Like the beautiful tulips that we have been coveted, that became almost currency way back in the Dutch days when, tulips were like the big craze. Those spontaneous colors were mutations. They were errors. They were genes that got mixed up. And yet these are the things that we value the most, because it created a difference and it gave a diversity. And then the plant recognized, oh, wait a minute, if I create this, I attract this, this, and this, let me make more of it. So giving ourselves permission and encouraging that every single mistake or error is just an opportunity for something that we might keep some of it, we might discard other pieces of it. So when we start to step deeper into the nature, we, again, yeah, like you said, you see the patterns in front of you, you recognize your own deep patterns. So this is a big piece of what I take my clients through, right? We work a lot on what are your deep patterns? Like, where are they coming from? And then how do I take these models? Like, where am I in my business? Am I a type 1 ecosystem and I'm just pioneer species and I'm like, all right, let's go. And what is instead, no, I'm kind of a third, type 3, which means I'm totally stable. But then if I'm totally stable, I've got to create a disturbance if I'm going to grow in another direction. So I literally have to cause that disturbance. And disturbance isn't negative, because in nature, nothing is considered negative. There are no negative traits in nature. And this is what I love about working with plants and working with the whole nature inspired way of looking at it, is that it's not a, Harvard Business Review that you have to follow these frameworks and steps. It's about, let's find the path that works the best for you, because you are a unique being of nature that has your own way that you've come into being. And so you have your own mutations that you've worked with, you have your own things that you've perfected, your own simple rules. So let's bring all of that together. So like you said earlier, be your more authentic self. Yes. And then, but more importantly, let that flow from you, from the fact that authentic self is a deep core of who you are and pretty much who you've been, like across your life. If you believe in past life experiences, these patterns, these deep patterns have followed you from life to life to life, because they are what helps you accomplish your soul mission. So they're there. They're always there. So why fight them? Why not enjoy them and embrace them?
I see that as what feels like, I often say like the universe is creating through us. We are an expression of the universe, but there is a certain flavor that these different, there's a Stephanie flavor, there's a Tigrilla flavor, there's an oak tree flavor, there's a blade, there's a grass flavor. Like there's certain something which maybe is held in what you're calling the deep patterns that these things hold, that will mean that they will create certain types of things and they will evolve in certain types of ways and hang out in certain environments where they'll thrive and others where they wouldn't do so well, or, maybe a combination of them. It's really, that's super cool.
Yeah, this is the reason why my kind of mentorship and coaching program includes, I have a course called Reconnect with the Plant Kingdom. And in this course, module 2 is all about life and death, because we have to remember to let things go and actually give birth to them, like consciously. But the third module is all around ecosystems, everything we were just talking about what is an ecosystem, but the fourth one, which I absolutely love, is the I in the we, the interrelated in the independent. Because the other piece is we often fear stepping into these things because I might lose my independence. Like somebody else can identify who I am. You can't put me in a box, blah, 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 blah. But the whole thing is the fact that I have these unique traits and I modify my environment, but my environment also modifies me. And this is an exchange. This is a dance. That's the game.
That's what
that's
I
the
feel
fun
so
part.
much in what you're communicating is I feel the dance and co-creation of it. We are not separate from the environment. We are not separate from nature. We are not separate from the plants. We might forget about them, but we're not.
Right. Right. And that's that's exactly what you said, that Stephanie flavor, that oak tree. It doesn't matter. Like somebody asked me the species of a certain plant. I'm like, I can tell you the species of some plants, but I don't actually go off trying to learn all the species, because I want to learn about that plant.
Yeah.
I want to learn about the spider plant that lives with me, that works with me, that co-creates with me. That spider plant is very different from the spider plant that I saw today when I walked into this other store. They are both spider plants, just the same as I'm a human and you're a human, but we've had very different experiences. And even my brothers or my sisters, whatever, we're all very different. And that feeling so comfortable of remembering that I am never alone, because I myself am an ecosystem, right? My whole body is an ecosystem. My gut is somewhat independent and yet related to who I am. My mind is somewhat independent and yet related to who I am. What my eyes see or what my ears hear is not necessarily what I want them to hear or see. It is what happens. And this all combines together in what today we call consciousness, or whatever philosophy you want to believe, that creates the I. But I'm still always a we. I'm always a we. And so when you think about that and you realize that the smallest sort of piece of me is still a conglomerate of others, then it makes it so much easier for me to think about partners and relationships and different niches and different landscapes and all these different aspects. And the other thing that nature, which I won't go into because I just gave a lecture on one tiny piece of this, and in my course, I also have a few lectures on this topic, is the fact that in nature, relationships even There's multiples of them. We tend to think about like competition and we're good friends and that's about it. And it's like, no, 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 wait a minute. There's like all kinds of relationships and they have timelines. Some of them are short, some of them are long, some of them should last, some of them and they all transform on a regular basis. So when we start to look at all these small things that usually create hiccups in our way of being, and we look at it from a natural lens, we start to realize that nature's already given us the models. And nature's already told us that it's okay to experience them. And nature is already showing us how to not suffer through them. Because things that suffer in nature die. And so that means if you're suffering through it, then, like maybe it's just let it go. So it's, again, it goes back to permission. It goes back to recognition of who I am. It goes back to being super comfortable in that skin that I wear and that natural part of myself, so that therefore I can present myself without having to judge anybody else. Like if I had to say one thing that working with nature has completely transformed in me is, after years and years, I always say that the first line of my book is that I'm the most positive negative person that you've ever met, because my mind thinks in negatives. I am just my way of being growing up and up until very recently was like super judgmental, like critical, and all these aspects of it. And when I started working with nature, all of a sudden it was like I had somebody who said to me, "You're blah, blah, blah." And I looked at them and I'm like, "You're absolutely right. That's what I am." And it's true. But that has really like lots of positive ways that I can use those same features. And if I'm using them in a way that's creating problems, then that means they're out of balance. And so I just have to find the balance. I don't have to try to eliminate anything about myself. I have to just find the balance for it. And nature shows me how to find the balance.
That's really cool. I love the self-affirmation, like how self-affirming this is. Like it's okay to be what it is that you are. It's okay to have these deep patterns, some of which may have created painful situations or been interacting with painful situations in life.
Right.
So if someone really wants to begin to learn from nature for their business and get inspired, like what is something that they can do to begin, like a good starting point that's simple?
Well, besides contacting me or taking one of my courses or working with me, okay, well, I'll give you a really simple one. I'm going to give you the super easiest thing that you could do. You can do it outside or you can do it indoors. It's all good. Sit with a plant, right? Just sit and suspension of disbelief for a second. Trust, just allow yourself that whatever's going to happen. And all of a sudden observe that plant. You can start with vision, because we as human beings, vision is our primary sense. So therefore it's normal, but look at the plant. Like whether you go outside, I love doing this with grass. Grass is kind of like my obsession. It's the plant, the undiscovered plant that has completely transformed my life, because it's a plant that always grows with other plants. It's really never alone. It's just about everywhere. A dandelion is good. I actually have a quiz to identify like your spirit wild plant, because it's all about those connections. But just sit with a plant. It could be a dandelion. It could be grass. It could be your, house plant, and just look in a way that you've never seen before. Allow yourself to just look and see what patterns do you even see visually? What patterns do you see growing? Like you'll see that patterns emerge. Does the stem have a pattern? Does the leaf have a pattern? Does the coloring have a pattern? What are you seeing when you experience this? And then just sit back with that after you've given yourself a little bit, and sit with it, bring it into yourself and say, well, of what I've seen, where do I see that in myself? Where does something that I'm seeing here represent something about me? And what does that actually mean? Without looking for an answer, but just asking the question out loud. The thing that I love working with plants, I tell everybody to get a plant journal, because plants don't operate with necessarily the same words that we do, or at least, they don't at first have that vocabulary. So you might have memories from a past. You might have a smell that comes up. You might have a sensation that covers your body. but you will feel that resonance, and that will start to open you to new pathways of understanding yourself and understanding the world in which you're immersed in.
Mm, super cool. You know, it was just came to mind that I did a fun conversation with some friends. It was called Creativity and Broccoli. And they do creativity and something. That's the theme of their conversations. And I saw they were doing creativity and broccoli. And I was like, I need to be a part of this conversation. It was too fun not to be. And we had a conversation with broccoli. And I actually said, you know, I was half kidding, but half not, like, oh, here's, you know, what's the broccoli saying? And we were talking about what the broccoli was saying and how we could learn certain things, like, wow, it's actually quite beautiful, but we take it for granted. And, you know, we're looking at the little tiny flowerets, and it's, you know, it's often thought of as plain and ordinary, but it can be escalated to these, you know, and we were just talking about broccoli, and we actually really riffed off of it and learned so much from that
Mm-hmm.
conversation. And
Yep.
it's that willingness to go into it with that, oh, like, okay, what can I learn? What can I see here about myself as nature, nature as me? That's super
Right.
cool. I
Yeah,
like,
because like you just said, right? All the colors, you think, oh, broccoli, like our eyes are tuned to see greens. We see more shades of green than almost any other color.
mm,
And so therefore, those nuances only come when you stop and you give yourself time. And that's the other beautiful thing. Nature sort of slows you down and allows you to participate in a process that you take for granted, to be honest. So you're looking at broccoli and you're looking at all these little florets and you're looking at all these little tips and you're like, oh, there's yellows there and
mhm,
there's some red and there's some green. And they're like, where am I hiding colors of myself? Where am I hiding
mm,
these nuances of myself in a different way? And I might be hiding it under a shell. Maybe this is the part of me that is like, I show this to the world, which is like I bring these and I mosh these together so that they look like a uniform color. But when I allow somebody to kind of come deeper, they start to see that that's made up of, oh, that comes from there and that comes from there and that comes from there. Or, you know, I have these tiny, tiny little leaves, you know, instead of, and these big florets. And I'm like, okay, so where are my tiny little leaves? Like you start to see these patterns emerging inside of yourself when you give yourself. And if it's a plant that you experience often, like broccoli, now all of a sudden there's like a familiarity that comes. There's a new appreciation that's going to come, which means the next time you eat broccoli, there's a different relationship there. There's a different nourishment that
mm,
comes out of that too.
mm. I like that. And just by virtue of the fact that I am looking with my own eyes and through my own perceptions, experiences, past, etc., beliefs, all of that, I will see something that is relevant to me if I'm open to
Mhm.
see. I can't not see something that is a
Right,
reflection of me. So that's really cool. Um,
right.
hmm.
And when we recognize that there's a lot of plants that their sting, like we think of, I don't know, stinging nettle, the sting, they can actually still have, they have both the ability to sting you, but the ability to take away the sting. The actual antidote to the sting is within the stinging nettle.
Ooh.
So if you identify and feel comfortable with stinging nettle, it's very possible that you're somebody who kind of like, maybe you have a quick tongue. Maybe you're somebody who's really sharp. You see things and today it's coming out critical, but you got to remember that you have the solution. So maybe the thing is, yeah, I might sting emotionally, but then it's also my job to come back and help that person kind of move through whatever it is that I created that sting from. So I'm both. I have the ability to embrace that. And so that's the other thing when I say, that's why I don't tell people like, go see this plant necessarily. Like, what is the plant that you chose? That also represents where you are in this moment in your life, right? If I go off and I experience grass, it's very different than if I'm going off and I'm experience, I don't know, a huge oak tree. And so what does that say about what I needed in that particular
Mm,
moment? Like maybe I needed something that was universal and needed a solution. I needed to see parts of myself that are much more connected in this way. Or do I need to see something about myself that needs to grow really tall, that needs to nourish with greater age? Because an oak tree starts nourishing its environment way later in life than grass does.
mm,
So there's all kinds of different characteristics that can come up. And so learning these techniques of plant communication, learning how to stop and experience this learn using these lessons then to both as metaphors and models and like I said and muses, but also as co-creators. Now all of a sudden it's a process that allows me to evolve with the plants, to evolve with nature, and that's going to again change the impact that I make, because it will no longer be acceptable for me to just do things for the sake of doing them. Like all of a sudden life takes on a different kind of meaning because you're reconnecting to what it is that creates life.
Hmm.
You're creating the conditions conducive to life. You step back into your role as nature, and therefore everything you do needs to create life in some ways, needs to nourish life in some ways, life with a capital L.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like that guide inside of us, that essence of whatever it is that I often talk about, aliveness. I mean, it's like following the aliveness. That is nurturing life and creation and moving things forward. The whole cycle of it, which
Mm-hmm.
includes decomposition and death and rebirth and all of that, right? Like that's a
Right.
part of it. It's not excluded. It's not just new, 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 right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another piece that you start to embrace, right? We work through the cycles. So, for example, my main kind of coaching and mentorship program is a year long because I want to take you through all the cycles, because you are very different in your autumn than you are in your spring, and you're very different in your winter, and each one has an archetype, like an archetypal process, but there's also then the personal process, because again, it's always my environment nourishes me and I nourish my environment, so we're both transformed. So there's general things that might happen that, yeah, you can read about in a book, but working with somebody, you start to then discover your own patterns and know that this is the way I'm going to generally work. And this might be the place where I'm really creative and explosive, but yet it's not really where I acquire customers. And I have a whole kind of explanation that I give sometimes around like how the differences between if a business is in the equator versus if a business is in the north, and how you use the seasons differently
Huh.
because their positions are sort of reversed in some ways, even though they both have winter and they both have, summer, but their winters and their summers are different. And so therefore there's processes that are way different. And so we want to go in there and deep and identify them. What is it that the way you work? What have you been resisting? Like I sleep for a long time during certain seasons. I just like, okay, I used to work 5 days a week and, now I just work one, and that's okay. And I give myself that permission to be like, I'm just going to sleep because this is the time of year when my body, with my culture, with my way of being, this is when we sleep. We take siestas. Like it's freaking hot. I grew up in a place where it's boiling hot during the summer. Like people go off and do all these cool things in the summer. No, I sleep. I sleep.
Yeah. I love that reminder because so often, I'm working with people who are recovering from the conditioning of traditional business, and like that you're supposed to go, 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 go all the time, that your energy level should be constant. But for most people, there's an ebb and a flow. There are seasons. There is spring, there's summer, there's fall, there's winter, and it looks
There's
different.
sunlight and there's moonlight.
Yes.
There's all kinds of full moon patterns, new moon patterns, lots of them.
Yeah. Cool. So I want to highly recommend that. I'm going to post links for all your stuff, but I want to really recommend to people that you go and do the wild plant spirit quiz, which is really fun and really interesting. So real quick, because I took this quiz and my wild plant spirit came up as chickweed. So what would you know about me as a chickweed person?
Chickweed. I like chickweed's one of my favorites. I have this obsession with chickweed. So chickweed has a lot of different, a lot of different characteristics. It's kind of almost grows a little bit like a bush in some ways. So there's this fullness that happens. So people who are connected in this moment in their life to chickweed tend to be very kind of full, in the sense of, rather than isolated and thinking I only work in one thing, I tend to look at something kind of from a greater level, different from a dandelion that also has kind of a yellow flower where it's very focused. But chickweed instead has lots of little flowers in lots of different directions and can grow actually up or it can grow smaller down. So I look at chickweed people as people who really who are expansive, who know how to use a terrain really well, because chickweed actually also is another one of these plants that grows in a terrain that you're like, how the heck did that get there? And why is it growing so well? And rather than being low to the ground, tends to grow a little bit bigger. And so therefore it's one of these types of wild plants that actually tries to take up some more space. It doesn't grow like, for example, purslane tends to grow across the ground. It tends to be much more low level. The chickweed's a little bit higher. It's a little bit flashier, but it's much more rounded. And that gives an opportunity for you to kind of explore your kind of how full your plate is. Like, what are all the things that make me a really well-rounded at whatever it is that I'm doing? And I'm not a specialist in this particular period, but my specialization is the fact that I can bring all these different aspects together.
Super cool. Yeah. And it is interesting. I'm going to think about too, like the plants that I am drawn to, like that I just really appreciate. Like I've always had a thing for dandelions, as you were saying, but like in different times, there might be a different one that captures me. That's really, really cool. Yeah. So I highly recommend take the quiz, check that out, because it's really fun and you can start. It's an easy gateway into exploring some of this for yourself. But if you were going to leave listeners with something that would really make the most difference for them, whether they know it or not, they probably don't. What message would you want to give to them?
See, I would say that if we're trying to think of something that you don't know or something kind of different, is the fact that the plant world is really around you 24/7. They have made a choice to nourish us in every which way, right? So even if you can't see, like, let's say I'm in the middle of my office and I work in a building and I'm in the middle of the building, I don't have any houseplants or any kind of thing around me, just your clothes alone is most likely a connection to nature. And so this reminder that the plant world is there to nourish us through our food, through our clothing, through our furniture, through their presence, through their creation of oxygen, through their carbon sequestering and all these aspects, remind us that we are never alone and that there's always a being out there that is really here to create a safe space for you, to give you a safe space. And if you can't feel it indoors, then that's fine. Go step outside, take off your shoes and sit on the grass, and feel that. But even in those moments when you're like, there is no nature. I mean, I hear this all the time from people. There's no nature around me. I'm like, really? What are your underwear made out of? And they're like, cotton. Yeah, there's no nature.
That's a very intimate connection with.
Exactly. It's a really intimate connection. So that's exactly it. That's my point. Like, this is like, that's what holds you up. Rope is made out of, nature. The things that we trust the most in the world, the things we crave in our moments of biggest despair, are always plant related. I mean, I like, there's lots of stuff that's made out of other materials, but the things I crave, the chocolate I crave, this is plants. That warm, fuzzy sweater most likely will be plants. I doubt it'll be polyester, that breath of fresh air, plants, like it's always, so that means you always have that lifeline. You always have those beings that are around there who want to be that lifeline for you. So trust in it. If you don't trust in yourself yet, which is totally okay, trust in the fact that there are other species out there that are cheering you on, because they've put in 470 million plus years on this planet. Like, they kind of want us to succeed because they want to see us do good things, because if not, they got to start all over again. They've invested 200,000 years in us. They watched us be born, and they've invested 200,000 years in making sure humans kind of came up in this world in a way that was nourished and safe and had, everything that they needed. So they're cheering us on. They're not saying, screw you. They're still like, okay, we're going to keep doing this. We're going to keep sequestering carbon. We're going to keep like giving them food. We're going to keep, photosynthesizing and doing all this and producing oxygen for them and producing sugars for them and producing everything. So trust in at least that process.
That's really beautiful. That's a very beautiful feeling. We're not alone. We're always nourished. So where's the best place for people to find more about you? And I will share all the links too.
So the best place to find, if you want just general information about me, is of course my website, but I actually have my own community. It's called the Naturally Conscious Community. And it's really simple because it's just community.tigrillagardenia.com. And this is a place where we can have these conversations. This is also a place where I host my courses and a place where I have masterclasses that I offer on plant intelligence and all these different programs. But more than anything, it's a free community where you can come and meet like-minded people and we can have these discussions. We can explore these metaphors. We can step into nature. And I offer lots of tips and tricks and like techniques and also lots of science, because my work, because I live in a spiritual community and I'm a former Kabbalah teacher, so I have the spiritual side, but I also have a master's degree from the University of Florence in vegetal future, which is plants, social innovation and design. So I love the science. And that's what we bring. And I'm an artist because I'm a music engineer. So I really cater a lot to healers and artists and that creative multi-potentialite mind. So this is a place where we can all come together and share our experiences and talk about some stuff that's kind of a little bit far out there to really change the paradigm of how we do business and how we can evolve reconnect back into our naturally conscious way of being.
I love that. Thank you so very much. This has been wonderful.
My pleasure. It's been fantastic. I always get excited and jazzed, as you can hear. I get like,
Good.
Good.
I want to have the full Tigrilla experience. That's what I said. So thank you very much. It's been an immense pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me for today's Wildspire conversation. If you'd like to receive a weekly Wildspire email from me filled with inspiring stories, unmarketing experiments, tips for playing your way to impact and income without the hustle and hype, insights from my spiritual business journey, and more, go to theawakenedbusiness.com/Wildspire. Until next time, may you know yourself as the gorgeous wild creation you are.